So dealing with women in politics, women in sport, this sort of subject, if we're answering that question based on where we are now, I think the first thing that needs to be established is that in what you can do and be clear about is the first way in which this question is addressed. So if, for example, you're a father or a mother and you have a responsibility of raising your children, then it begins there. Because one thing that I find Christians have a tendency to do with a lot of the right intentions is they look to strike at the heart of the issue, and the gospel, therefore, is very quickly not in view, because it's very quickly about, well, we need to stop this kind of feminism spreading and so on. But again, it takes time for change to take place, and that change will happen in two key ways in our minds. Number one, as we've considered, the proclamation of the gospel in the public square and in these situations. And number two, in raising, in this case, young girls to know and understand what a feminine calling looks like. Now, there is a distinction that needs to be made here, because some may ask the question, well, should a girl be educated at all? And I would argue strongly, absolutely, a girl should be educated. Even a girl can go on to university and study any manners of subjects. Again, the principle is with regards to when it comes to a woman's calling regarding the subject of family, being married and having children, are you going to put your desire for, let's say, a career ahead of the family? That's when you get into the contradiction with Scripture issue. And some of the principles that can be learned, even the things that you're educated with, can be used in a significant way, in the way by which you can be a blessing to your husband, and even potentially in ways you educate your children. So it's important to think about these things. So in terms of this subject, what we can clearly see in society, and I think the woman in sport thing has been clear, in politics too, is it's about promoting people, the kind of minorities, if you like, whether it be due to something connected with diversity, or here because it's women and they need to be in the kind of the prominent place. We definitely see that there's an agenda which attacks Scripture. This is not a sexist thing to say this. This is something that we see very much. Feminism is an attack on God's design for both masculinity and femininity. So that should be, in terms of what we say verbally, rejected. And if someone were to push back and say, well, does that mean that no woman can be a solicitor, or no woman can play football, that kind of thing? I wouldn't start by saying, oh, well, no, but women can't do any of these things, but start by establishing, well, this is actually what a woman is called to do. Now, within that framework, can a woman do something recreational? Can a woman play sport at maybe a non-competitive level? Some would say that she could, yes. But if it's to do with something that is going to be not just at the expense of her family, but in the sport issue, at the expense of her kind of physical makeup. I mean, I'm not sure how many of you have looked into this, but if you see what they do to teenage girls, and then in the kind of early adulthood, they will literally make them take certain medications which will stop hormonal growth. They'll also make them do things that will impact on their menstrual cycle, and they'll also make them wear certain clothing, which is to literally impact the way in which their body forms. All of these are things that are definitely happening at the competitive sport level in women's sport. And that's something that as Christians we need to be very clear that we need to reject and say this should not be happening. The way in which men are participating in sport at this high competitive level, women biologically and in terms of God's design cannot and should not be doing this. And similarly, in the political arena, I remember, I can't remember when it was, listening to, it was Margaret Thatcher. She was talking about there's kind of three kind of key areas in her life, and one she had to kind of sacrifice, and that was to do with some aspect of her work. But she was focusing on being a prime minister and also, I think, like a wife and mother. Now, it was quite good on one level that she was seeing the importance of the wife and mother role, but at the same time I was kind of scratching my head and thinking, how do you do the prime minister thing at the same time? It's kind of difficult to kind of get the balance between the two. And this again is where the principle lies, in terms of just the spirit of this, where men are called to be in positions of leadership. And if women are being driven to have that desire in an area like politics, then again, this is something as Christians that we should be clear in saying that this is not in the direction in which God has designed woman to be a helper to the man, which is a principle we find in the book of Genesis. So I think maybe ask if anyone's got any kind of follow-ups on that, because it's quite a quite a multi-layered question. There could be many avenues you could go down in that. So anything specific in either of these areas anyone would like to follow up on?
Would you like to comment on the role of women in the church in relation to that? We see now in many denominations women taking a prominent part in the church. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, Scripture is very clear on this in terms of the role of leadership is the calling of a man, and also in terms of women being silent in corporate worship. That also is something that's stated very clearly in 1 Corinthians 14. So certainly, I mean, like in our church, we would be very clear that this is a man's calling, both in leadership and in terms of leading in worship. Yeah.
Men are taking place leading
Yeah.
a church.
Yeah. Now, one thing I should probably say on this is that one thing that's become prominent in a lot of evangelical churches is that they'll employ a woman's worker. So you'll have like a pastor, maybe an assistant pastor, elders, deacons, and even, I mean, usually the kind of two key areas that they start to drip in what is potentially a slight feminism undercurrent. They'll start by having the female deacons thing, and they'll also have the woman's worker. Now, when it comes to the woman's worker thing, what they're effectively doing is they're creating a pastor for women here. So men, you're the elders, you're pastoring the church, but the actual shepherding, you'll shepherd the men. This woman's worker is going to be the one who'll be shepherding the woman. That's what it becomes practically. And again, not just in terms of that's not within the calling of who is called to lead and shepherd the flock, which is the men, the elders, but also that principle is actually attacking the very dynamic of how the family is to operate. So if you're dealing with a woman who maybe has the gift of singleness and she is using her gifts for the sake of the Lord, then I would strongly argue it's not within that capacity, because men have been given that calling of leadership and shepherding that women do not have. But there are other ways in which women can very much serve, in addition to if they're not married with children. Yeah. As well.
Following on from even the kind of politics side, you see in America there's a lot of women who are very vocal about Christian-based ethics and filtering it into daily life and politics. With that sort of thing, like Ali Stuckey came under a lot of fire a couple of weeks ago for doing speech.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, this gets into more grey areas when you're dealing with women in the mainly, usually political arena, who are conservative Christians, but they're starting to use their voice where they're effectively at times teaching Scripture. I think it does become, I mean, some of the things that she's been doing have become problematic, because she's starting to effectively teach and exhort men about what they should be doing in the family home. So I think when you're getting into that realm, then it becomes a challenge. I think what I would say is that what we see in the media with the kind of like famous characters like that, we don't know what the marriage dynamic and the church dynamic is, and I think it's very important that if someone is in a spotlight context, then they very much need to be kind of being shepherded in a manner that is going to be in line with Scripture doctrinally, because I would have some concerns with what she in particular has been doing in terms of that level of prominence. But others, I know, conservative Christians have seen it as being a good thing, because 95+% of what she's saying is true and in line with an orthodox Christian position. But it's more just the fact that it's a female voice doing that, and it slightly contradicts to the actual nature of what she's hoping to achieve. Yeah.